this beautiful man that was a neighbour of mine growing up in Dublin has transitioned back to source yesterday. His name was Michael, or Mikey, and he had a profound impact on me in my life just by being Michael, just by being himself. I was 17 when I met him. We had just moved into a place called Castleknock in Dublin. And he was the window cleaner. He used to clean everybody's windows. He was a very spiritual man. He was quite religious in his Catholic faith. But he was also very gregarious, outgoing, full of life. He loved his community, he loved his neighbours, and he loved people. He would talk to anybody. He talked to a plank of wood. He was that kind of character. I was very touched to hear of his passing. I was driving home and I knew that somebody had passed. I was driving, and when I went to visit my family, my mother told me he had passed, and I wasn't surprised. I always know when there's going to be a death. Not always, but I often pick up on there's certain death frequencies that you feel, oh, somebody's passed. So I was 17 when I met him, and I'm sharing this personal story because I think it illustrates an interesting spiritual understanding. I had just moved in to a new place, a new house. I didn't know anybody. I was nervous. It was summertime. I wanted to enjoy my summer, tried to get to know some people before I went to the new school with boys and girls, which was totally new to me. I'd come from being in a convent girls' school to boys and girls, non-denominational. I was terrified and excited. Michael had an accident. He was cleaning windows up on top of the ladder, and some child came and pulled the ladder away, and Michael had a crash, and he broke and fractured a lot of bones. He was in a bad state. He was lucky to be alive. And I used to see him from my window out on his crutches, and he'd have to have someone helping him initially. And then I would see as the days went by, he got stronger and stronger, and his determination, his focus, his intention to heal and to put himself back together was so inspiring. He used to call me Princess. And right up until I saw him before COVID hit, I was in his house briefly and we were chatting, and he still called me Princess. And he wanted to know if I'd met the right man, and we were talking about that. And he was just so sweet and funny and loving, and I'll miss him. So back to being 17, I'd see this man every day, struggling to walk, struggling to find his feet, literally. And as the time would pass, I would see him get a little bit stronger, and he would maybe drop one crutch, and then he'd be out on with no crutches. And it was so inspiring. And I used to write a lot of poetry. So I wrote a poem. And around that time, or maybe a few years before that, but there was a popular film called Dead Man Walking. Do you remember that film with Sean Penn and Susan Sarandon? And it was a great film. But to me, he was like the opposite of that. He was life man walking. This man, Michael, was full of life. I called the poem Life Man Walking. I really should dig out that poem. I do have a copy of it somewhere buried hidden in my treasure chest of memories. And the poem was all about how here I was, 17, full of youth and vigour and vitality, and I had nothing to complain about. Here was this older man who had every reason not to get up and not to make an effort and not to try, but he did. He wanted to be alive, he wanted to be here, he wanted to improve his physical state, and he wanted to heal. And his inspiration, his motivation, his focus was a wake-up call for me, maybe feeling a little bit blue in my new town, in my new home, not knowing anybody, missing my old boyfriend that I left behind in Glasnevin. And I wrote this poem about how lovely this soul of this man was, and I can't remember the last few lines. It was something like, life man walking, something, keep walking and keep talking, you inspire me. It was a very honest poem about how he had inspired and touched me just by watching him recover and watching his strength and his confidence in his recovery. I'm feeling emotional telling the story. And I wrote the poem, and the poem was there for a few days, maybe a week or two. And I remember my angel saying, you must give Michael this poem. And I felt embarrassed. I was 17 and I was shy. I was very shy. And I didn't know him that well. He was a neighbour up the road. And I felt a little bit silly because it was a very innocent kind of poem. And they would say every day, you need to give him this poem. And one day I literally felt like I channeled this, like physically they got in my body and said, we'll give you the confidence. He needs this poem. This man needs to be seen. This man needs to know he's seen. I ran up the road after him. He'd gone way up at this stage. I ran way up the road. I tipped him on the shoulder. I smiled and I said, I wrote you this poem. And I gave him the poem. And he was flustered and confused because he hardly knew me, and I'm giving him this poem, telling him I wrote him this poem. It was mad. And he just grabbed me and gave me a hug, and I was embarrassed and I ran off. And that night he knocked on the door and he had tears in his eyes, and he had the poem in his hand, and he gave me a big hug and a kiss, and he said, Princess, that's the nicest gift anyone's ever given me. And he said, it's such a lovely poem. I'm going to keep it forever, and I'm going to keep it in my little box with my things. And it was wonderful, and it struck up a friendship. And he always checked in on me. We'd often knock on the door and we'd chat. He always gave me a hug and a kiss. Still called me princess right up into my 30s. And, my mum told me the other day when his daughter came in to say that he'd passed, she had the poem in her hand. And it was tattered and battered, and she said he carried this poem in his back pocket, and when he was out in the pub or whatever, he'd say, look what my little friend wrote me. She wrote me this lovely poem. This is all about me, this poem. And she said, can you ask Aoibheann's permission to read the poem at his funeral? And I was so happy and delighted to contribute to his funeral in that way and to have the poem read out. He was an inspiration to so many people in the community and in the neighbourhood and in his family and in his life. He had 3 beautiful daughters that he absolutely adored, and he adored his wife. His wife died 5 years before him, and I knew it wouldn't be long before he'd follow because they were 2 peas in a pod. I'm sharing this personal story with you to illustrate the power of a good deed, to illustrate the power of allowing people who touch us, who touch our hearts, allowing that to be shared. We should share with other people when they have an impact on us, when they influence us in a loving, peaceful, joyful way. I could have just let my inferior ego stop me from sharing that poem with him out of embarrassment or teenage insecurity or whatever. But I didn't. I remember thinking, you just got to be strong. And I was really shy at 17, folks. Like, you know, I've come a long way in the last few years. I wasn't always as outspoken as I am now. And I just remember the fear of it, like I was shaking giving him this poem. But something in my soul knew that there was goodness in the intention of that poem. And the poem was about him. And he had a right to know the goodness, the light that he was bringing into the world. That he was an expression of Source, the God Force. And I'm so glad that day I gave him that poem. Because he actually did keep it. He actually, I mean, that was 23 years ago. The man had the poem still close to him, and the fact that it got to be read at his funeral is a testament to the awesome character that Michael was. So if you have someone in your life who inspires you and who has moved you and who has lifted up your heart and given you joy and given you laughter and given you an intention or a focus like Michael gave me at 17, share it. Let them know, because we can't go back. There's something about the moment. There's something about being in the moment that's important. And I remember that moment so clearly at 17. And I remember it meant something to me and to him. And I didn't know the bigger picture. I didn't think that 23 years from now he'd be reading it. Or, sorry, his daughter be reading it at his funeral. But I think it's important that we are able to express when somebody has helped us. And he did help me. When somebody has been kind to us, when somebody has been generous of spirit, when somebody has led by example, strength, confidence, love and joy and peace, like that man did, please tell them, share it with them. He needed that poem. I didn't realise that at the time. He needed that poem. I needed that poem now. That poem has come back to me. When you do good in the world, it comes back to you. It might take 23 years before you understand what it was all about, but trust your heart, trust your soul, trust your instincts. Your instincts, your intuition, your heart will never lead you wrong. It's connected to God. It's your lifeline, it's your telephone line to that higher power. Thanks for listening and indulging me in this little personal story of mine. And I hope this inspires you. We're passing it forward. I hope this inspires you to share your appreciation. That's what it is. It's appreciation. Sharing that gratitude with someone who's been good to you and who's inspired you. Sending you so much love, so much God Source light. Namaste.